So welcome to Brevard County. For those that are from our municipalities, I'm Mark Bernath. I'm the Public Works Director. Thank you for everyone from Public Works, Road and Bridge. We also have a number of other departments within the county. Thank you as well for attending. And thank you for FDEP for coming to brief us. So just quick couple housekeeping items. One, you may have noticed that our restrooms right out in front of you or behind you, they're out of service because we're redoing them for the first time in 30-something years. So if you do need to use the restrooms, go straight up to the second or third floor, and right where you see them out here is where you're going to see them up on the second or third floor. If you haven't signed in, if you can please sign in before you leave. And then there are some quick facts that are going around that Karen is passing. If you don't have and you would like, she'll give them to you. And if we run out, we can always send them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charlie and Zoe. Thank you.
Hello.
Oh, actually, one other thing. If you have questions, I don't know how you guys feel if you want them to.
We have a slide at the end for questions.
Okay. We are going to run these mics, though, to you if you have questions, because we are videotaping it so we could use it as future training.
Does this work? Cool. Hello, everybody. My name is Charlie Nolan. I work for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in the Compliance Assistance Program, specifically in the Submerged Lands Environmental Resource Coordination Team, SLERC. SLERC handles a lot of things, handles docks, seawalls, wetlands, mangroves, and state lands. Today we're just going to be covering mangrove regulations and permitting. As well, I will be joined by...
I'm Zoe Carr, also work for DEP. I work in the permitting section for Environmental Resource Program. So basically same stuff, but on the permitting end, we also do like your oyster restoration projects. We get a lot from Brevard County. So I will be going over the permitting section of the presentation today.
We will have a slide at the end for any questions. So if you do come up with any questions, please just hold them until that end. All right, so we're here today to try and educate county and local municipal partners on the importance of mangroves. Why do we even protect them? What activities are regulated? What activities can and cannot be permitted? And also answer any questions that you may have relating to mangrove regulations. So first, we're going to go over the ecology and importance of mangroves. Then we're going to go over the actual rules, the actual legislation that govern mangroves. And then we're going to go over the various permits and permitting requirements that mangroves have. And then we'll have a section for, again, questions and feedback at the end. So, mangroves. We know them. We love them. They are a broad group of tropical plants that have unique adaptations that allow them to survive in salty and wet conditions where other plants struggle to survive. So these shoreline conditions, right? You have water that is constantly going up and down. You have really high salinity. You have storms. You have fires. You have a combination of extreme conditions that these plants, actually, they're not even in a single genus or a single family. They're found across multiple families and multiple genera. They're an example of convergent evolution across many different plant groups. Certain species found similar strategies to deal with these harsh tropical shoreline conditions, making them an incredibly unique and important species for our shorelines. So in Florida, we have 3 native mangrove species, all of which are protected under the 1996 Mangrove Trimming and Preservation Act, which is 403-9321 to 403-9334 Florida statutes. These are red mangroves, Rhizophora mangle, black mangroves, Avicennia germinans, and white mangroves, Laguncularia racemosa. So, red mangroves, right, they're kind of the iconic species. They have these aerial prop roots. They look like the walking trees. These prop roots help these species tolerate more intense inundation, as well as the fact that they have really unique propagules that actually begin growing while still attached to the parent plant. So that means they actually give live birth. Yes, it's a tree that gives live birth. So these are actually, unfortunately, the most susceptible to improper trimming and will often defoliate and die. Cutting their prop roots is not considered trimming. Black mangroves, also iconic. They're known for having these pneumatophores that are actually roots that stick up out of the ground that help boost that oxygen intake and provide stabilization during tide changes. The leaves often have salt on the underside, right? That's how they get rid of all that excess salinity. So you can actually lick the back of the leaf, and it will taste like salt. It helps you identify the plant. It's scientific. They flower in the summer, and they can handle super high salinity, but not really super intense inundation like the red mangroves. They are also fairly frost tolerant and can be even found in the far northern edges of Volusia County, and we are hearing reports that they might be up in St. Augustine. So more and more counties are going to be dealing with this. White mangroves. They don't really have iconic prop roots, and they don't really have plentiful pneumatophores. They still grow some pneumatophores, though. They're still very important and beautiful mangrove trees. I consider their leaves to be their most iconic feature because they have this really distinct notch at the leaf apex, the tip of the leaf. It kind of makes almost a little bit of a heart shape. They also have these two glands at the petiole. That's the thing that connects the leaf to the stem. Those are nectaries, and they actually produce a sweet nectar that is really important for pollinators and insects. They do sometimes produce pneumatophores. They are the most resilient to trimming, but they tend to grow well above the mean high water line, and they are not resistant to frost. So what are things that aren't mangroves, right? We get this a lot because I'm with the compliance program, right? So I deal with complaints and potential non-compliance. So we'll get complaints about people clearing mangroves. We go out there, there's no mangroves. It was all Brazilian pepper, right? People really, for some reason, they see dense plants along the shoreline, they think mangroves. So the most common things we see are Brazilian pepper. People mistake this for mangroves all the time. When not in bloom, they really can look like a white mangrove if you don't examine the leaves, because the leaves are the biggest difference. Brazilian pepper has leaflets, so instead of one leaf, it has little tiny leaves, and they have serrated edges. While white mangroves have simple leaves and entire edges, so they're just smooth on the edge. Brazilian pepper is less salt tolerant, but will grow in lower salinity areas among mangroves and can crowd them out. It is obviously a super nasty invasive species, and clearing it is not regulated under state law. Buttonwood is a mangrove-adjacent native tree. You might see it in a lot of mangrove literature, right? But it isn't a mangrove. It is not protected under the 1996 Mangrove Trimming and Preservation Act. Buttonwood leaves are alternately arranged, while mangrove leaves are oppositely arranged. Another tree that I have seen growing among mangroves is a seaside mahoe, another invasive tropical species. It is salt tolerant and known to grow among mangroves, but it has heart-shaped leaved and hibiscus-like flowers. So, you know all this cool stuff about mangroves, they're awesome trees, but why? Why do we care, right? Well, they're keystone species in the mangrove swamp ecosystem that is found along the southern shorelines. These are key habitats for young fish to grow up in before entering open water. So really, a lot of our fishing industry relies on healthy mangrove ecosystems. They also stabilize the shoreline through their unique root systems and reduce erosion and coastal flooding. We don't love coastal flooding, so we really want these mangroves. Additionally, during storms, they actually reduce that wind and wave action. They take that force before it gets to the homes. So they protect both the coastal ecosystems as well as the built environment. They're important nesting habitat for birds and other species, and unfortunately, despite how critical they are to keeping our shorelines and our cities safe, we are losing them. Tampa Bay has lost about 50% of mangrove swamps since the 1900s, and Charlotte Bay has lost nearly 60%. Stronger and more frequent hurricanes are causing irreversible mangrove losses, meaning it's becoming even more critical to protect the ones that we have. So now you know what mangroves are, why we love them, why we protect them. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of what the rules are. So the 1996 Mangrove Trimming and Preservation Act was passed in 1996, so it's going to be turning 30 soon. This statute was enacted to prevent further loss of critical mangrove resources while still allowing for the trimming of mangroves within riparian mangrove fringes. It also requires certain mangrove activities to have a professional mangrove trimmer, because remember, some of those species are incredibly sensitive to trimming and will just die if done incorrectly. Additionally, certain activities need authorization and permitting from the department. They need another layer of review so we can make sure that it's going to be done correctly. So an RMF, this is a legal term, and it really limits what can be trimmed under general permits and exemptions. So An RMF is defined as mangroves growing along the shoreline on either private property, government property, or sovereign submerged lands. The depth of the RMF cannot measure more than 50 feet in depth between the most waterward trunk and the most landward trunk measured in a line perpendicular to the shoreline. They do not include mangroves on uninhabited islands or conservation lands, including conservation easements. Unless the easement has a specific language that says you can trim mangroves, you can't even touch mangroves in a conservation easement without further authorization. And that doesn't just mean it doesn't talk about it. It has to specifically say you can trim mangroves here. If it doesn't say that, it doesn't count. So what can take something away from being an RMF? Well, if it's separated from the shoreline by a marsh or by some body of water or just something separating it from that shoreline. What's a shoreline, right? Like, what even is a shoreline? Well, it's a boundary where surface waters and wetlands meet uplands. So wetlands are considered waters under state law. So let's say you have an open body of water, and then you have a little bit of a marsh, and then you have your backyard. Where that marsh meets your backyard, that's your shoreline. It's not where the open water meets the marsh. So let's say you have your home, you have your backyard, you have a little marsh, and then you got some mangroves. Those mangroves are not in a riparian mangrove fringe because they are not on the shoreline. The shoreline is separated by that marsh. So in some cases, the shoreline is just the mean high water line or ordinary high water line. There isn't a upland, wetland, surface water. It's just surface water, upland. But in some cases, that wetland delineation line is going to be your shoreline. So keep that in mind. The mangroves, if they do extend off private property, they must be on government-owned land or sovereign submerged lands. You cannot trim mangroves not on your property for obvious reasons. So what is trimming, right? This is the fun thing about laws, is they got so many definitions, right? Trimming is to cut mangrove branches, twigs, limbs, and foliage, but does not mean to remove, defoliate, or destroy the mangroves. Alter is anything other than trimming. So when we think about trimming, think about, small changes, something that does not harm the plant in any way, something that does not remove the majority of the leaves, something that does not kill the mangroves. If your trimming is doing any of that, it's not trimming, it's altering. So altering includes cutting the prop roots of red mangroves or cutting the pneumatophores of red mangroves. That's not the branches, twigs, or limbs or foliage. That's roots. You can't cut that. Cutting below 6 feet, that's altering. Removing most of the leaves of a mangrove, even if the height stays above 6 feet, that's defoliation, that's altering. Living versus dead mangroves. Well, the Mangrove Act defines a mangrove as any specimen of the species. That does not distinguish between living or dead. So dead mangroves still are subject to these regulations. They still provide habitat and nutrients to organisms, and they're still reviewed, any trimming or altering is reviewed under the same regulations as living mangroves. So mangrove trimming, now here's some exemptions, right? A lot of these exemptions are geared towards homeowners, right? Because they're the primary people who want a nice view. So you'll note that a lot of these are really specific about what sort of riparian mangrove fringe and what sort of trimming is allowed. So if you're in a riparian mangrove fringe that you own, you can't use any chemicals or herbicides. That goes for everything. You can never use herbicides or chemicals on a mangrove. The mangroves cannot exceed 10 feet, and you can only trim up to 150 linear feet of the shoreline or 65% of the shoreline if it's over 150 feet. So let's say you have a 150 linear feet shoreline, your mangroves are 9 feet, and you own it. You can trim those mangroves yourself down to 6 feet. So pretty narrow, but specific. Now, let's say you got some taller mangroves. So now you're going to need a professional mangrove trimmer. Again, you got to own it. You can't use any chemicals or herbicides. They can't be taller than 24 feet. And if they're over 16 feet, they must be trimmed in stages so that no more than 25% of the foliage is removed annually. Because if you remove too much of that foliage, they are just going to drop dead. Also, if you're a PMT and you're trimming red mangroves for the first time, you have to notify the department 10 days before trimming. Again, this is because red mangroves are really sensitive to trimming and improper trimming and will just die. So we need to know beforehand. Again, only up to 150 linear feet. If it's over 150 linear feet, only 65% can be trimmed. Also in that picture, you'll notice that funny little pole. That is our mangrove measuring pole. It is 6 feet tall. We stick it next to the mangroves. That's how we check if they're cut too short. So get into some of the weirder exemptions, okay? So let's say you have a riparian mangrove fringe and you got a permit 20 years ago to trim it to a specific height and a specific style. So there is an exemption to reestablish or maintain a prior mangrove configuration. So let's say you really let it go for decades, right? And now your mangroves are 26 feet tall. Can't use this exemption. Unfortunately, they have to be below 24 feet in height. Again, can't destroy, defoliate, or remove the mangroves. And you do have to give documentation of the previous configuration. You have to say, look, this is really what it looked like. We're just bringing it back. You can't just say, trust me, guys. The mangroves, we always kept them this high. No, you got to prove it. Also, again, if they're above 12 feet, not 120 feet, if they're above 120 feet, you have grown some monster. Please call us. I want to see those, actually. And also, if you're PMT trimming red mangroves for the first time, you got to give us notice so that we can check. Maintenance trimming of mangroves in accordance with a previous exemption or issued authorization. If you get a permit, you can use that permit going forward. So if you got a permit to keep mangroves at 10 feet, you don't have to get a new permit every 5 years. You can just keep going with that permit. Also, another little weird exemption, if you're a state licensed surveyor and you're performing your duties, you can trim mangroves limited to a swath of 3 feet or less in width. Trim, not alter. Mangrove trimming conducted by a duly constituted communications, water, sewage, electrical, or other utility company or by a federal, state, county, or municipal agency. This is probably applicable to people in the room, but basically, if you are doing government work, you can trim mangroves as part of governmental duty. Again, this exemption specifically refers to trimming, not altering. The trimming of mangrove trees by a duly constituted communications, water, sewage, electrical utility company for the maintenance of utility lines or construction of new utility lines. Again, trimming. So let's say you're trying to install utility line, right? You got those mangroves, they're really high up. You need to trim them a little lower. You can do that. You don't need a permit. You can just do it. The trimming of mangrove trees by a duly constituted communications, water, sewage, or electrical utility company on the grounds of their plants and conducted to avoid unnecessary trimming. So you have a wastewater treatment plant, right? And there's mangroves, and they're just getting into some of the equipment, some of the stuff. You can trim them. And here's a pretty important exemption criteria that isn't listed under the exemptions. It's actually listed in 43932.8, paragraph 5. If you have a project that is exempt under Florida Statute 403.813 or permitted under Part 4 of Chapter 373, you can trim and alter mangroves within that project footprint without a separate mangrove permit. So what does this mean? Basically, you've gotten your permit. Your project has been reviewed. We've already looked at it. We've already checked it. You can trim or alter the mangroves as part of that project because we've already reviewed it, right? Or if something is exempt, you do have to follow those exemption criteria. And this is really meant to be limited only to the minimum amount of trimming or altering necessary to conduct those permitted activities. So an example, you're building a 900 square foot dock outside of an outstanding Florida water or aquatic preserve. It meets 403.813.1b exemption criteria. It's got mangroves within that platform area. You can alter those mangroves. You can't trim or alter outside that footprint. A man-made canal needs maintenance dredging. If you read 403.813.1f, you need to inform the department 30 days before you conduct maintenance dredging, and you do need to provide plans and documents showing the original state of the system to show that you're just bringing it back to that state. So if you meet those criteria, if you do it the right way, you can trim or alter mangroves within that proposed maintenance dredging area only. You can't, decide, oh, I also want to go cut down mangroves over there. That's not part of that maintenance dredging project. You got a dock. You got a permit for that dock. There are mangroves growing over the walkway. You can trim those mangroves to maintain access because that's a permitted project. So let's say you're out and about, you're doing your job, or maybe you're just biking around, enjoying the sights, and you see something that looks a little suspicious, like something in that photo, right, where there's just a bunch of mangrove prop roots and no tops, and they're all dead. Well, we would so appreciate it if you would let us know. So in the Mangrove Trimming and Preservation Act, there is something that allows local municipalities, counties, cities to have delegated authority. I think Broward County has it. I think Hillsborough County. There's a couple of small cities. Nobody in Central District has it. So if you are in Central District, which we cover Brevard County, you should send any suspected violations over to DEP Central District. Our email address is dep_cd@floridadep.gov, or you can call 407-897-4100. We do accept anonymous complaints, so if you are just on your off day, chilling around, you see something, you want to give us a heads up, you don't have to give your name, you don't have to give your contact information, but as you all are probably aware, emails are public record, so maybe don't send an email because then you wouldn't really be anonymous, but you can call. Complaints will be assigned to somebody on the SLRC team, so to me or one of my coworkers. If you have photographs or documentation, ideally timestamped, definitely send those over. That greatly helps. And all the documents uploaded in the case are actually uploaded as soon as they're sent out to Oculus, which is our public document database, so you can follow along the case progress just by going onto Oculus. And what happens if you, cut down some mangroves you weren't supposed to? What do we do? How do we deal with it? So there's three things: monetary penalties, restoration, mitigation. Monetary penalties are actually laid out in a couple of different places. The first place is the actual Mangrove Trimming and Preservation Act itself. For repeat offenders, so not first-time offenders, but for repeat offenders, we can fine $100 per tree illegally trimmed and $250 for each tree illegally altered. So let's say you got in trouble in the past, right? We're like, hey, put it back. You do it again. Let's say you cut down 10 mangroves, 10 times 250, $2,500 just for 10 mangroves being cut down. So it can really scale. First time, right, we can use either ELRA, the Environmental Litigation Reform Act, which does have a flat $7,500 fine for contractors that do the work. Or we can use matrix penalties, which is a range depending on the size, the amount of trees cut down, where they were located, how mature they were. And it can range anywhere from $750 to $15,000. So that's the monetary side of things, but what about restoration? Well, the Act specifically and explicitly requires that any area in which 5% or more of mangroves have been altered or trimmed without authorization must either be restored or mitigated at a mitigation ratio of 2 to 1. So let's say you needed to buy 1 mitigation credit, well, actually you need to buy 2, so double that cost. This is Florida statute. Statute explicitly states if you trim or alter more than 5% of the mangroves in an area, you have got to put it back. So we do make people put it back. And this is an example of some mangrove restoration that was required. You can see the mangrove saplings planted along the riprap. And again, in statute, it's really explicit. Everybody part of the project is responsible jointly and severally. The applicant, the permittee, the landowner, the person performing the trimming, they're all responsible for it. They're all responsible for paying penalties, they're all responsible for doing restoration, and they're all responsible for ensuring the restoration is successful. So we can fine every single person involved, and we can make every single person involved play a role in restoration and maintain that restored area. Restoration must result in an 80% survival rate, and if an 80% survival rate isn't reached, additional plantings will be required. Again, this is all from Florida statute. Statute is pretty strict about restoration. So now you know all the potential ways you can and cannot cut mangroves without needing further review by the department. So I'm going to give it over to Zoe, who will go over the nitty-gritty of the permitting process.
All right. So now that Charlie has scared you with all of the compliance things you can find yourself dealing with, let's go over how you don't end up there. So we went over the exemption criteria. So you don't have to notify the department to do the exemptions, right? But if you feel like you would like to notify us or you want a review just to confirm that you are exempt, you can apply with us. We have a form for all mangrove applications, all mangrove projects. It specifically speaks to the general permits and the individual permits that we have, but you can still use the same form for your exemptions. You can find that online, and you can fill that out and send it to us with your project plans, photos, anything else, and we can confirm and send basically a, sorry, I keep forgetting to breathe. But we can send out basically, if you're familiar with other department documents, we can send out a verification of exemption letter. And that would be like an official document that just says like, yes, you are exempt, good job. So if you aren't exempt, we have general permit criteria. And again, general permits are still for trimming of mangroves. These are not going to be for alteration. We have 2 GPs, one for review and one for navigation. Both of them are subject to some of the same restrictions. They can only be used once on any parcel, can only use one of each GP, so both GPs can be used on one parcel. You must be conducting them in stages, so no more than 25% of the foliage can be removed annually. Authorized height and configuration can be maintained. And notice must be made in writing with sufficient information to determine if the trimming, underlined, trimming, qualifies for a GP. And we have 30 days to make this determination unless you agree to an extension, and it does cost $250. This is for the view one. This is for riparian property owners. Trimming must be on lands owned by the person performing or authorizing the trimming. Mangroves must be part of a shoreline. So again, not an island, not separated by another system or by water. It has to be supervised or conducted by a PMT. They cannot extend more than 500 feet waterward, so you have a much larger swath that you can trim under the GP. Again, that's landward trunk to waterward trunk measured perpendicularly. No more than 65% of the applicable mangroves along the shoreline are to be trimmed, and no mangrove trim less than 6 feet, no herbicides or chemicals. And applicable is in bold because if we think about breathing. If we think about what the applicable mangroves are for trimming, so if you have a riparian mangrove fringe and then you also have like a mangrove island, that mangrove island is not applicable for trimming under this GP, so it can't count as part of that 35% of non-trimming. So you can only look at what is actually applicable for that 65%. If you're doing a multifamily project, all units must allow for equitable distribution of that 65%, and you cannot combine this with an exemption in order to trim 100% of your shoreline. So this basically like locks you into a no-trim area, and again, you can combine it with the navigational GP that we'll go over in a little bit. And just to reiterate, 35% is for the applicable mangroves, kind of explains that again. And if mangroves extend past that 500 feet, the entire system can't be trimmed. Like you can't trim up to that 500-foot line and just say, yeah, the rest can grow. It has to be the entire swath can only go out to 500 feet. And that bottom image there kind of outlines these various restrictions. This one is for the navigational channels, basins, or canals, and is for the clearance of watercraft. Again, navigation, right? That's what it's for. It has to be supervised or conducted by a PMT, must be on land owned or controlled by PMT or person contracting PMT, or on sovereign submerged lands immediately waterward or perpendicular to such lands. Again, this is for trimming, limited to branches or trunks, which extend into that channel beyond a vertical plane of waterward prop roots or root system. The two little images down at the bottom really indicate what we mean by that. So you can see those prop roots that extend farther into that navigational channel. You can only trim waterward of that. So you can't trim anything landward of that. You can't trim those prop roots because, again, trimming of prop roots is not trimming, it's altering, right? So what if you don't meet exemption and you don't meet general permit? Well, we're going to go into go into an individual permit. They are subject to evaluation under 373.4141, so you cannot violate water quality standards, and it cannot be contrary to the public interest, and if you're in an OFW, it has to be clearly in the public interest. It's also subject to evaluation under 373.4148, so we do consider cumulative impacts within that same drainage basin, and it may require mitigation, which is kind of what Charlie went over: purchase of credits, creation, restoration, preservation, or enhancement. We do consider reduction or elimination of impacts. So if you come to us and say, I want to alter all of the mangroves along this shoreline, we're going to say, why? Can you do a little bit less? And you do have to really support what you're trying to do. And just like any of our mangrove authorizations, no herbicides or chemicals are to be used, and a PMT is not required for this, but you do have to assure us that it's going to be conducted properly. And the fee can range anywhere between $420 to $830, depending on number of mangroves to be trimmed.
And another compliance side of things is that if you do get a permit to do some mangrove alteration, right? Let's say you get an individual permit and you don't use the PMT and those mangroves get defoliated and die, you violated those permit conditions and you would probably get enforcement action. So when you do get a permit, it's very important you adhere very strictly to the terms of those permits, because any violation from those terms can become a compliance issue.
And if you're familiar with our individual permits, they do all come with what we call specific conditions, and that basically just outlines very specifically what you can and cannot do with this permit. And that would be where compliance comes in and says, this specific condition you have not adhered to, and then it becomes a compliance issue. This flow chart is really handy. It's not 100% accurate, but it gets you where you need to go. If you use this, a little box says your answer will be the highest level of permitting you have ended at between all three parameters. So we have a depth, a height, and a length. So let's look at one that I can read. So depth, are the mangroves attached to your shoreline? If you say no, then you automatically have to do an individual permit, right? That's going to be your highest level. You're already there. Just apply for the individual permit. But if you say, yes, they're attached to my shoreline, they are less than 50 feet, I got an exemption there, they are less than 24 feet tall, yes, it's an exemption, but I don't want to trim less than 65% of my shoreline, and it's larger than 150 feet, individual permit. So I would automatically apply for an individual permit there, because that is going to be that highest level of authorization out of these three. And of course, if you apply for an individual permit and then we review it and we determine, hey, you don't actually need this, you qualify for a GP, we can always bump you back down, refund any money you've paid us. The review process is a lot of back and forth between us and you guys to make sure that you get the authorization that you actually need for the project. Styles of trimming. We don't actually see a lot of different styles of trimming that come through our office. It's usually just like top to bottom trimming. It's pretty straightforward, but there is windowing, hedging, and undercutting. Windowing is a pretty interesting one. You can see in that top picture, you get that kind of view right in the middle, but we still maintain that upper canopy. We still maintain some of the lower foliage and roots, of course. This one's really nice. It can be the least detrimental to the mangroves. It still provides a view, and it still maintains shade, privacy, windbreak, additional habitat for wildlife. It's really nice. Hedging, not all trees will work as hedges. Leaf mass must remain on the tree. So like red mangroves, they're not going to work for hedges. They're pretty tall, and most of their leaves are pretty high in the air, so if you cut them down to a hedge, you are defoliating. So not going to work. Undercutting, we don't ever see this. It's like, it's not super great. It's probably just best to just trim like normal, but it is an option. So applying to us, this link will take you to what the actual form is. These are all the various items that you need to provide us. Obviously, we need to know who owns the land. We need to know if there's going to be a PMT and who they are. Plans and drawings are really important, especially if you're going to be stage trimming. We like to see that stage planning. Location and species of mangroves to be trimmed or altered. That's really important because a lot of times we will come out and do a site visit to confirm site conditions. As much as we We would love to believe the information that anybody gives us. We do have to confirm it for ourselves, take some photos, and it all becomes part of that final permitting package, and also really helps us with, like, in the future, if you do come back for maintenance trimming or what have you, we can see that history of the site, right? Location of any easements, including conservation easements, deeds, that's important. Photos, proposed disposal area and plan is important because mangrove swamps are wetlands, right? So if we're leaving anything in those wetlands, it constitutes fill, and you cannot do unauthorized fill in wetlands. So anything that you trim or alter needs to be removed from those mangrove swamps and placed into a upland area. You also have to have a signature of the applicant, owner, or agent certifying the information and allowing us access to the site.
Questions?
Yeah, now it's time for questions.
Does this work? Yeah, it does. Awesome. Yeah.
Any questions? No?
Yeah, definitely.
Did anybody hear that? They will forward the presentation if y'all want it. I'll get there. Hold on. That one? That one.
Yeah. No. That is an enforcement case. The mangroves were cut below 6 feet. All of these pictures were taken from various cases that I have throughout the Central District area.
For the 6 foot, where is the bottom end? Is that from the water line, from?
Substrate, where the plant actually roots into the ground.
So that's why we have that pole that you've seen in a couple of these photos, because we can stick it down into the water until we touch the soil.
What if the properties are in like the flow line of the ditch? Does the individual permit allow removal?
So ditch maintenance would generally fall under exemption criteria. There are some rules about the exemption criteria. It's not just go crazy. There are some, you do have to let us know within 30 days, and you do have to give us plans that show the original configuration of the system. And then if, we review that and we say, okay, you're bringing it to meet the original, the way it was designed, then you can alter mangroves within that footprint. But you either, if, let's say you're just altering mangroves for the sake of altering mangroves. You're just like, they're ugly, I want them gone. Then you have to apply for like an individual permit, because that's really all you're doing. But if you're doing something that involves mangroves, but it's part of another project, it's part of something like constructing a stormwater system or maintaining a stormwater system or doing some sort of broader scope, if that activity is authorized, you, through that authorization, will have the ability to trim or alter mangroves as necessary for the project. But also understand, mangroves are very iconic. People see them, people know them, and people call us constantly anytime they see anything that is even a little bit sketchy. So if you are doing a project that involves altering mangroves, make sure you do it right. Make sure you are meeting that exemption criteria, review that exemption criteria, apply for a verification of exemption just to have that get checked if you really want to be certain. You don't have to, but always it's recommended. Because people will call. And if we come out there and we say, oh, you were cleared to maintain this ditch, but you also just like mulched mangroves all over the place, that's still a violation. So make sure that you are really, dotting those I's, crossing those T's. And if you have any questions, call us before you do something.
I can kind of summarize that a little bit. I think it got a little wordy there. But if it's within the footprint of the ditch, and you're doing historic maintenance, like this ditch has been maintained over time, and last time it was maybe 5-10 years ago, and it's time to maintain it again. And there's a mangrove or a prop root within the footprint of the actual ditch, so like within the lowered part where that had been dug out to make the ditch, not up on the bank of the ditch, then yes, it could be altered. I would suggest anytime you're going to do that to get a verification of exemption. And then if it is something that hasn't been maintained for a long time and you're bringing it back into a historic configuration, I would suggest coming in for a permit because that may need some sort of authorization. Because if it has not been maintained for a long time, is it truly maintenance or is it a restoration project? And at that point, that's going to be a different type of authorization.
And then what permit would we be filing for, the general?
I would apply for an individual because we can always knock it back down to a general as we review and see if it.
And just to be clear,
qualifies.
you're not applying for a mangrove permit. You're applying for a dredging permit.
Yeah, that would be that would be a different ERP permit. That would be like a restoration of the drainage system permit. So it's an
So
ERP.
again, just those mangrove permits are just about mangroves. They don't touch anything else. If you have a project that involves maintenance dredging or filling or any sort of construction project that involves maybe a mangrove swamp or mangroves growing in things, you apply for the activity you're actually doing, not for the mangrove trimming. So you would apply for a dredge permit. You would apply for a construction permit.
And when you apply, make sure that you include the mangrove information in your application. So if you're applying for a dredging permit and there are mangroves in the footprint, make sure you include that in your application. You do need to show what kind of like resources are in the project area.
Because then once you get that one permit, you're covered for the mangrove stuff. You don't need to get two, you don't need to get a dredge and mangrove permit. You just need to get that dredge and then you're covered under that exemption. So makes it a little more streamlined.
Question about historic, because we keep bringing, historical. If you don't have a lot of information other than like historical imagery from Google or something showing the flow line of these ditches, because a lot of them are not mapped or maintained. I mean, especially around this county, you installed, stormwater pipes that were connected to a historical drainage system, where just water flew.
Then I would suggest at that point, so the question was historic drainage systems that we don't have any information on how the system was designed. So at that point, we don't have what the original depth or width or any of that. I would come in for an ERP dredging permit to make sure that you're getting that authorization, because at that point, then you're going to get the permit. It's going to show at this point, this is what the system is, and going forward, you won't need another permit to do the maintenance on it. So that's going to kind of formalize the design at that point.
Once we have that permit, is that good carrying on that?
So as long as the design of it doesn't need to change. So as long as you're like, we came in, we have this historic system, we're not sure what the design was, but it's been 20 years since someone touched it or whatever. It's way overgrown, it's not functional. It used to function and help drain, and we're having flooding issues, so we want to come in and we want to restore this historic drainage, right? Reopen that so we don't have these flooding issues. Very common. You're going to come in for an ERP dredge permit. This is the environmental resource permit. So you're going to come in for the umbrella term for all of mangroves, dredging, all of that. So you're going to come in for that ERP, environmental resource permit for dredging. You're going to mention if you have mangroves in the ditch or other resources in the ditch, hey, we also have this outflow where it meets this brackish water. We've got mangroves in there. We need to maintain we want to put it back how it was 50 years ago. We don't have documentation that shows the depth or width. This is what we're proposing based on aerial review. That would then get reviewed through our permitting process, including that mangrove alteration. So that would be under the dredging of the ditch, though. And that would not include anything up on the shore.
And then you can use that going forward to actually do exemption for maintenance dredging in the future, because then you would have that documentation, right, to shows that design that we have approved. So then you can call it maintenance going forward, and you can show us that original design that was permitted. Absolutely, yes.
Because then if we get a complaint, like a citizen sees you out there doing the maintenance, we can go back 5-10 years and say, oh, okay, in 5 years in the future, here's the design that was approved by the department. We can go out and we can measure the width and the depth and say, it's meeting the design that was approved, and you're good.
So systems that have been historically maintained, I mean, some of them, the maintenance cycle is like
Yeah.
I mean, is that still considered like
So yeah, if
historically maintained?
yeah, so if it's been maintained on a 10-year cycle and it doesn't need to be maintained more often than that to continue its function. So some of these, they overgrow in 2 years because they have Brazilian pepper or other high growth plants in them, and then they block up and they're not working. But others, which just have some grass in them, maintained for 10 years. As long as they have been maintained and they're still functioning and we're not trying to restore, that would be maintenance.
Then for the ones that are being restored that you're getting that individual permit for, when you were talking about identifying the trees that are there, I mean, are we identifying generally that there are mangroves in that section and just providing like a proposed cross-section and a map?
Yes.
Or are you talking like
No.
a tree survey?
You don't have to get a tree survey. It's kind of like that we know that there are mangroves, which are a protected resource in the ditch. So we know that protected resource is in the ditch. We're identifying the square footage of that impact. And then the department in the permitting process will likely do a site visit to assess that. And then you may get asked for the height or the width, but honestly, you can measure that yourself. I think everyone knows how to use a measuring tape.
We would encourage on the permitting side that if you are proposing trimming or altering mangroves as part of a permit, that you identify the species and the number of mangroves that you are altering. That way we can write it into the permit because we want to be able to say, this is what we are authorizing. And that way, if anybody does complain, we can reference that permit and we can say they are authorized to do this amount of work.
I saw more hands up in the back.
So, is there a parameter that you can be permitted? If I had a 5-mile long ditch, can I permit all 5 miles? Have one permit?
Yes, it would need to be an individual permit, and there'd be some back and forth about the parameters of that specific case. So individual permits are site specific. So the general permit is very general, right? It's like, hey, come in, check the boxes. If it doesn't check all the boxes, we can't issue a general permit. That's when we move to the individual. So the individual is very site specific and alters a lot with what parameters we can include.
And if I had an original permit that extended my surface that I'm trimming, would that original permit cover the extension, or would I need an additional permit?
It would not cover the extension. You would need an additional permit.
What's the turnaround time on these permits?
So initial review is 30 days. And at that point, for an individual permit, we can issue RAIs for individual?
Yes, we can issue RAIs for, if you come in for a verification of exemption, we can issue RAIs, individual permits, RAIs. And if we're speaking specifically for mangrove permits, general permits, we don't issue RAIs or DNQs. If you're familiar with DEP documentation, a DNQ is it does not qualify. These will basically kind of stop our time clock and give you guys time to gather all the information that we're requesting. But if you are doing a general permit for mangrove trimming, we can't stop the time clock. So within those 30 days, we have to either tell you yes, no, or you need to withdraw. So applying for a mangrove general permit can be a little tricky. We encourage maybe applying for an exemption or an individual, and then we can work with you on making sure that you have the correct authorization. If you're applying for a ERP, like a dredge and fill, that includes mangroves, then yeah, it's that 30-day review period to start, and then every project is a little bit different depending on what kind of questions we're asking of you.
Okay, so like an emergency, like we have a mangrove growing over like a wastewater pipe that's leaking, or a stormwater pipe. So a stormwater pipe, I would call the department and tell us what's going on. I would say if it was like wastewater spilling out, like that's causing environmental harm, we're gonna, call us and we'll get you something quick, but. Yeah, but flooding during a storm, yeah, I mean, like, is removing a mangrove going to stop that flooding, though? Like, that's really the question, because so that's lack of maintenance in general. So that emergency maintenance, if it's within the footprint of the ditch and it's restoring maintenance of a ditch that exists and we know it's there, then okay, that might be something that would be exempt. But again, I would call things like that into the department, just to be sure. But often, storm event flooding like that is not due to a single mangrove tree or a little bunch of mangrove trees in a ditch. It's either high rain event that, well, we live in Florida and it's all pretty low, and there's a lot of wetland that's been altered over many years, and we don't have a lot of flood capacity left. Or it's that our drainage systems are not maintained in their historic configuration and their design configuration, so they're not functioning how they should be. In the very back. Mangroves encroaching over roadways. So if it is blocking like the flow of traffic, then again, I would recommend coming in just to get that verification, but similar to like on a dock, that's an allowed roadway, you could trim up the side. Yeah, so like on the road, but I'm saying it's similar to like the most common thing we see with this is a dock, right? So the dock crosses through the mangroves. The road's crossing through the mangroves. It's built, it's approved to be there. You could trim up to allow, but that would be only on the part of the road that is necessary, right, to drive. So trim up the side, but not cut them flat. I would say, Jason, on a roadway, overall utility, yeah.
Have the clicker.
Yeah, it's going to fall under that exemption. The exemption, though, is for trimming and not for altering. So again, that's going to be branches, twigs, limbs. It's not going to be roots. It's not going to be cutting it down to the ground. So that's the difference there. So typically hand trimming is going to be best to not cause defoliation or death of the mangrove, because once it causes that, your mangrove's now altered. And some species of mangroves, removing only 25% of the leaves is enough to kill them, which seems like that's just a small amount of foliage coming off of a tree, especially when we're like used to trimming our crepe myrtles and we just like cut them off. I don't know if anyone else has a ton of crepe myrtles in their yard and you just like chop them off once a year. But if you remove more than 25% of a red mangrove in particular's foliage, it is likely not to survive. So it gets difficult. Hand trimming is the best way to trim mangroves. And then also if you trim, I believe it's on our FAQ sheet that was handed out, but there's a trimming method. And if it's not, I can get it. We have a different FAQ sheet that shows it. But when you trim it, hand trimming and doing a little first cut and then doing the main cut keeps the branch from breaking as badly, and then it is more likely to survive. Yeah. Yeah.
So circling back around to the individual permit for restoration of a system that's historic.
Yeah.
If you're doing that, is there gonna be mitigation?
Potentially, it depends on the system. But potentially. That's something that is going to be very site specific, so I can't really give an answer to that. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so metaphors, are those considered a measurement from your, would a red mangrove be proper, would that be the extent? Would a metaphor be the same thing?
Yeah, so the nematophores are protected. So pulling up nematophores or cutting down nematophores or burying nematophores would be altering the mangrove. Yes.
So we see a fair amount of trimming by the public for guides or using paddling trails. So we're not doing that ourselves, but we see it from time to time. It's minor, but you know, they're just going through as they're going through, and anything new is hanging over there, they're trimming it off. So suggestions on how we should be thinking about that issue or not?
So this is like a navigational trim in a established paddling trail. So if it's maintaining that,
So there's,
This would be the.
if
yeah.
you have maintenance trimming of mangroves in accordance with a previous exemption or issued authorization, so let's say that paddle trail was authorized under a general permit for navigation some odd years ago, and people are just going through maintaining that configuration, it would fall under that exemption. If it was, I guess, never authorized and was just like a 100-year-old paddling trail, it's a bit of a gray area, but it's one of those things. I mean, is it worth it to come? I mean, maybe come in for a general permit just to have it covered going forward. General permits are kind of simple.
So, yeah, but that's, we're doing the maintaining of it, right? I mean, we never.
Yeah. You're not
we never
maintaining
have
it.
to,
It's.
Because whoever's going through out there on a regular basis is doing all of this. I mean, short of having a sting operation, we have no idea who it is. It's never been a permitted trail, it's just an old ragline ditch system that's been there for years that people have been paddling and we've marked over the years in our conservation areas.
So what I would say is like, if there's no environmental harm and the mangroves are healthy.
Yeah, it's very minor. Yeah, I wouldn't put it in a harm category, but that's just kind of into it.
Yeah. I would say that.
It would be impossible for us to enforce it without a sting operation also, so.
Yeah.
I'll just do it there. We're not in the business of trying to chase every branch trim or
Yeah.
whatever like that.
Yeah, it's fine.
We're looking at, when we're doing mangrove compliance, because I'm the compliance supervisor for SLRC and ERP, we're looking at large areas that have been impacted, whole shorelines typically of like on a property.
I mean, I think occasionally what happens is, yeah, if there's new crop roots getting out in the middle and someone's probably, chopping that off maybe before it gets rooted, but that'd be the worst of it. It's very rare and minor. It's mostly just things above the.
That are,
I would so love if they
Impacting.
didn't.
yeah.
It's hard to control the public.
It's a very healthy tunnel system. Something we see a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
So I know you talked about needing PMTs, and there was one specific, I forgot which one, but there's an exemption for it. So does the county or other jurisdictions here need PMTs generally? If so, what's involved? Who certifies? Is there training?
So PMTs can be certified in a few ways. We can send out some additional information on that, but anyone who's an arborist is automatically, like a certified arborist is automatically going to be a PMT. Not every arborist is going to be comfortable dealing with mangroves. We also have a state registry where people who are PMTs can join the state registry of PMTs by proving their certifications, either by arborist, or there's also like an environmental certification they can get, or a PMT class they can take and get certified just as a PMT. Any trimming over 10 feet is going to need a professional mangrove trimmer.
It depends on like the type.
And yeah,
It would depend on like the
And
type
it
of
depend on the
exemption
authorization.
or permit that you have, like Zoe pointed out, for an individual permit, you don't actually technically need a PMT. We just need reasonable assurance that you're not going to kill the mangroves. And then if you do kill the mangroves that you weren't supposed to kill, then you'd get in trouble. So you'd probably want to get a PMT to avoid that potential situation. But if, let's say you are conducting trimming as part of a dredge activity, right? You're altering the mangroves in the footprint, but then you got to do some trimming on the sides. And let's say you're not using a PMT, you got this, you can do it, and the mangroves are fine, they all survive, they all do great, you're good. Let's say you take a little too much off the top, and the mangrove gets defoliated and dies, then that might be a situation where you might be in a little bit of compliance situation. So my recommendation, use your best judgment, depending on what's the size of the mangroves. Like, are these really huge mangroves that you need to trim and thus are very delicate and prone to defoliating? Or are they like really sturdy, hardy white mangroves? You don't really got to worry about it. Just, get in there with your trimmers. Use your best judgment, and when in doubt, probably err on the side of caution, because the last thing you want are potential restoration and potential penalties. But it's really based on the type of activity and the result of the activity. If you do the activity and the mangroves are all healthy and fine and you were in compliance with your permit, then you were in compliance with your permit. If you do the activity and you kill the mangroves and you're not in compliance with your permit, then you're not in compliance with your permit. So do whatever you need to do to be in compliance with your permit.
I would say exempt activities over 10 feet, you're going to need a professional mangrove trimmer for an exempt activity where the mangroves are taller than 10 feet to meet the exemption criteria. General permits, some general permits are going to have, general permits have the requirement of a professional mangrove trimmer in most cases. Individual permits are going to be where you lose that requirement.
So on the dredging ones, the dredging exemption, if we're dredging and we're trimming the face, even if they're over 10 foot, we still need a PMT, or are you saying if they're over 10 and we want to bring them down?
Yeah, if they're over 10 and you want to bring them down is when you would really need the PMT.
We don't care about the height, it's more the face on the ditch side, so we can still do that without a PMT.
So if you read the 403-93285 section, it doesn't say anything about a PMT, right? So like I said, it's really activity-based and outcome-based. If you're trimming these mangroves and they're really dense, they're really healthy, and you're just taking a bit off the side, and you have maybe consulted with an arborist and they say, yeah, you're totally fine, and you do your thing and everything turns out fine, everything turns out fine. But it really will depend on the site. So there's no requirement under this exemption criteria that mandates you have a PMT. It's based on your own best judgment.
For like the dredging permit, does that account for like a vertical trimming? That would be included in kind of like our notes of like what we're doing? Like say we need a piece of equipment to have clearance above it as well, to get through the entire thing.
If it would be part of the project, it would be part of that permit. If it was something you were doing separately, say you were dredging a canal and then you're like, oh, wow, this canal's so beautiful. We also want to trim the mangroves a little bit, and it's not really part of that dredging project, then obviously separate permit. But if you're saying like, oh, as part of the permitted activities, we need to get maintenance in, and so we're going to need to do clearing in this specific area, that would be part of that project, so it'd be part of that permit.
Go ahead.
Can you circle back to RMFs and specifically when you're not in one? I'm thinking inland primarily. If I understood correctly, anywhere where you have a wetland, potentially you could be an RMF situation, but could you clarify that?
Yeah, so an RMF, a riparian mangrove fringe, is going to be any riparian mangrove, so that's along a shoreline. A shoreline is defined as where a wetland or a surface water meet an upland. So that could even be inland, because that wetland doesn't have to be on the coast necessarily. Does that help?
Okay, so if we have a ditch in the middle of the county, nowhere near a shoreline.
The ditch is the surface water. So the edge of the ditch, where the ditch meets the upland, is the shoreline. And if it has mangroves on it, it's still mangroves. And then we could look at that specifically, that like a site specific, and get you a better answer on that.
So if we constructed a permitted facility, we've sodded it, right? We're replanting mangroves, we've got a ditch, maintenance berm, everything's nice and clean. We come back in 10 years to do maintenance and mangroves are colonized. Can we cut those down under the original permit, or are we now required, is that a trimming?
So if it's within the ditch that needs to be maintained, then yes. But if it's like not in a ditch to be maintained and it's just like along the side of the ditch, no, you would not be able to trim them without a permit.
It depends, I guess, where
Yeah.
the mangroves are colonizing. Like you said, you sodded the area. So let's say, you've built a potable water treatment facility, right? And there's like a gate, and you've sodded the front of the gate, and then mangroves grow. Can you clear cut those mangroves? Not really. I mean, why? Does the facility not function? Like, it's for maintenance. It's for keeping whatever the permit activity is to keep functioning. So if it's just, they're just popping up sometimes, and they're just like in a lawn, it would really depend on like where they're growing and what that facility is.
I live in the middle of Orange County, and if I had a mangrove in my yard in Orange County, it is still protected. that's an inland county. If there's a mangrove growing in my yard, it's protected under the Mangrove Protection Act. It doesn't matter where it's growing. So if the maintenance is something that falls under the exemption for maintenance, then it would be allowed. But you'd have to look at the exemption criteria within the rule. And the Mangrove Protection Act is like under 10 pages. You can read the whole thing. It's also the most clearly written rule that DEP enforces. I will tell you that.
And again, you can always apply for a verification of exemption if you have a situation like this where you have mangroves popping up and you want to know, hey, am I exempt in cutting these down? You can provide us like photos, documentation, an explanation of what you're looking to do, who owns the property, and then we can review it and be like, yes, you're exempt, here's your authorization letter, or we can say, no, this would not be exempt, you would need a GP or you would need an individual, and then you can decide if you want to move forward or if you want to leave them as is.
Just follow up to that, so is that verification, do we have to pay fees, and is the county or the jurisdiction generally exempt from those fees?
That's a great question. I don't want to lie to you. I don't know. Generally, they are like $100 for a verification of exemption. I don't know if there's a waiver for counties. I don't know. Nobody knows here. But we can definitely check on that for you. That's not a huge ask. If you want to send me that question via email so I remember to look it up for you. Yeah, I just don't know either. Yeah.
The like just as like kind of I guess an illustrative example, let's assume this building, this whole facility, right, is a permitted facility, and it involves like a stormwater maintenance, and those stormwater ditches have mangroves growing in them, right? So those stormwater ditches aren't going to work, right, if there's a bunch of mangrove growing in them, so you clear them out. Cool. Let's say there's just a mangrove growing like over there, just like hanging out.
Like on the lawn, not
Like-
in the ditch.
That wouldn't really count under the exemption, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, then you can get into the facility.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. But if it's like, if there's an egress, ingress where you would need it, and you have just like a sodded lawn beside it, a lot of facilities have sodded areas around them just to keep it maintained and not let all the dirt around the facility erode, right? If you have a mangrove just in the middle of that, that's probably not going to qualify for an exempt trim or alter.
Kind of adding on to that, I think when he talks about sod, a lot of times our facilities, when we design them and permit them, it's with a maintenance access at the top of the bank.
Yep.
So if mangroves were to propagate in the maintenance access that is needed for the heavy equipment to maintain that ditch,
Then again, should qualify under the exemption that is about municipality maintenance.
But that would also be in those permit plans, right, it's up. Like, if you submit a permit to say, we're going to construct this sort of stormwater management system, and there's going to be this specific area for ingress and egress, that's part of your plans, right? If, let's just say, down the road, you decide, I want to clear the whole area just to make it even easier, well, that's maybe going beyond what your plan specified. So, I mean, if a mangrove grows in front of a door, that's super impressive. Was there like concrete? Like, I mean, I'm fascinated. But like, yeah, that would fall under the exemption criteria to maintain the intended use of the facility. But that's a narrow kind of prescription. It's not intended to be taken beyond that to just go, if it's even near a ditch, you can cut it. If it's near a situation, you can cut it. It's kind of meant to just be there to make sure that that facility can work.
Yeah, I think we speak a lot in the exemptions about like the minimum amount of trimming that you want to do to maintain an area, right? You don't want to just go ham on getting all the mangroves out of the way. It's like whatever is the minimum amount to be able to maintain the facility and your access.
A scalpel, not a machete.
just for, on the design side, when we submit those permits, I don't know that, I would guess it's about 50-50 as to whether or not we actually label that maintenance around the water the ditch or the pond or the canal, or just design it, to accommodate that maintenance. So we just need to keep in mind, I guess, on plans going forward, that that's clearly identified so that in the future, there's not a debate on what
And if there's a situation where you need to come back for maybe for a permit modification to update those plans, that's something that is feasible. So you can do that going forward if you want to be thorough.
So just to keep timelines in mind, how often are the verification of exemptions getting through on that first 30-day window? And then with general permits, the individual, how often are you having to issue RAIs? Because I know with our own county permitting, it would be rare for a project. And of course, it depends on quality of submittal and the project scope. But what's the real timeline for general and individual and exemptions?
I mean, like you said, it really depends. It's a case-by-case basis, project-by-project basis every time. We have exemptions that can come in and get out the door in a couple days if it's a great submittal. We have exemptions that come in and sit for a while because people are non-responsive or they don't want to provide us something because they don't believe it's part of what we're allowed to ask. So it is. I can't really give a solid answer to that. We want to turn things around as quickly as possible. We really do, because we have a lot of projects and we want to not have that many. So usually we request that the applicant, reviews. We have that link to the form for the mangrove form online that outlines a lot of the information that we are going to request. And so if any applicant can provide all of that information off the bat, that is going to significantly cut down that time. So.
Saplings were to come up in an easement or right of way, something like that's been maintained though for right of ways, no permits for mangroves, which has never been existing. Is that able to be maintained mode?
Again, that would go under that exemption for the utility easements and everything. So, yeah.
If it was just like a residential lot that just had that they just filled in and they're just coming up, what about that situation?
Nope. Private residential lot that has saplings growing on it, those saplings are protected.
So they would have to come into the permitting from you if it was like a construction project coming in.
Yes.
Just some clarification, mangroves are wetland species. They are really only going to grow in wetlands. So if you got mangroves growing somewhere, you can be fairly certain that's a wetland. And wetlands are also protected under state law, which we haven't gone on to in this presentation. But if there's mangroves in an area, that should be a, whoa, we might need a wetland delineation. There might be wetland impacts if we do this. And then you would come in for a permit for those wetland impacts. So if somebody built a house, right, and suddenly there's mangroves growing in their front yard might be a wetland. So they should be careful and make sure that they're following all applicable regulations, because I know Brevard County has wetland regulations, and we have wetland regulations. So
Yeah, you can mow in a wetland, but mangroves are specifically protected. So that would be the difference between just a regular normal wetland that's like full of red maple or something versus a mangrove swamp. So.
So if we complete a project, and after we're finished, the homeowner comes and starts planting mangroves down the side of this thing, can we remove those?
Whether they're planted or they naturally recruited, mangroves are still protected. So it doesn't matter how they ended up there. So I guess it would depend on the project and the mangroves, right? So
We just did a bridge, and then the homeowner decides to come and plant mangroves down the side where they're gonna get in the concrete there that we just did, and now we can't remove them.
I mean, I think at that point, like, you have an easement for that, I
if it's,
presume.
is it like you have riprap under the bridge and the mangroves are growing up in the riprap? Because we have riprap all over with mangroves growing up in it and the
Solid
still.
concrete, like a head wall, and then they climbed down around and started planting them all along the front, all the way to the open.
If there would be maintenance needed at some point to that, then the mangroves under that utility and at road, utility, roadway, municipality maintenance exemption, you'd have to look through there and make sure that that specific case, and that's why we don't want to get into too site-specific because we don't have all the details, right? So I can't give you a clear answer. But in that exemption, you can go through that. There's an exemption specifically for municipalities maintaining roads and
Roads and bridges, yeah.
roads and bridges. And so when you get into that, if it qualifies for the exemption, then you would be able to trim or alter as that exemption allows. But again, I would double check the rule, and you can always call and ask about a site-specific thing. But yeah, again, mangroves planted or naturally recruiting are still protected under the rule. Doesn't matter how they got there. They're there now. Even transplanted, and there are some we don't usually see them transplanted except from nurseries to where they're at.
Yeah, I guess the heartache is now it's increased maintenance for somewhere where, to use your example about the mangrove in your yard, if your neighbor chose to plant a mangrove in your yard, then is it now protected tomorrow when you find it?
Yes. Yes.
Even though they trespassed and planted it?
Yep. And you can handle the trespassing with the police, but the mangrove's protected. It's kind of a cut and dry. Like the Mangrove Protection Act protects living and dead mangroves all over the state of Florida. So you can email our general inbox or call our general phone number, and Charlie's pulling that up now. The same number that you can report violations to. If you tell them instead of reporting a potential violation, you're saying, hey, I have a question about a site-specific question about if something needs a permit. Instead of sending you to someone on the compliance team, they will send you to someone on the permitting team.
And just to really quickly touch on that, as somebody on the permitting team, if you send us just brief information on like, hey, would this project be exempt? We're not gonna like give you official authorization via email saying, yes, this project is exempt. We're going to refer you back to that Mangrove Protection Act and maybe reference certain rules that you could possibly qualify for. But if you think you're exempt, you need to apply for a verification of exemption if you want us to confirm that.
Also, we do have the ability to have a pre-application meeting if you have a site where you're very confused about what you might need to apply for. You can call that same phone number and request a pre-application meeting. And they're not always, sometimes, it takes some time to get those set up because you need a few different people in the office available. But that is an option that we do have where you can request a pre-application meeting if you're like, I'm not sure what I need to apply for. That same phone number can get you the right person to get you set up there. Our reception team is fantastic.
Regarding dead mangroves, is it a requirement that they get permitted to you if they want to trim the dead mangrove and just keep the root ball intact, or can they not be touched at all?
So
They fall under the same exemption and
The
permitting
same-
criteria as a live mangrove, so the exact same.
So like if it's a 8-foot tall dead mangrove and it's like mixed in with a bunch of living mangroves and we want to trim them all to 6 feet, that would be within the exemption criteria. If it was something where it was like 20 feet tall and they need to come in for a general permit or something, then they would, again, it would come in with that. So same criteria, living or dead. We have a lot of people who want to cut the dead ones down to just the roots, and that's not something that's typically allowed.
Because dead mangroves still provide a lot of ecological benefit. They provide, honestly, most of the same ecological benefit as a living mangrove, a little bit less, but they're still really important. So altering one is still going to have negative environmental harm, so we still protect them. If you're doing some sort of like mangrove restoration project and you want to remove some of the dead mangroves to replace them with living mangroves, you should probably come in for an individual permit and like get that reviewed. Yeah.
And I do know that in Brevard County in general, there have been many mangrove and oyster restoration projects that might facilitate the need to remove some dead ones. Again, that's something where when you come in for the permitting for the restoration project, that we would review. Any additional questions? Yes.
For the land surveyor exemption, you mentioned that we're allowed to cut a 3-foot wide path. Is there anything beyond that?
You're able to trim, so that would be removing the limbs, twigs, branches, not cut the stumps, up to 3 feet wide to allow the surveyor in egress, essentially, to allow a surveyor to get to a location they need to do their job. So it has to be within the duties of the surveyor to be there, and it does need to be a licensed surveyor. And essentially, it's going to be using hand tools to just make you enough of a path to get through.
Going off of that, what if the tree is actually growing up on the monumentation? Because we've seen where monuments are inside of the trunk of the tree. Sorry to be super specific.
Yeah, you're good. That one is food for thought. I think if it's, yeah. Yeah, I would say just that one specific tree that's like blocking the monument, not like you can cut all of them down, right? Like,
Common sense on that says, yes,
yeah.
duty to keep things moving, the monument is there, because of, other reasons, and those seems to allow us to do so.
Anything else before we wrap up? Okay, one more.
My question is that we're allowed to cut a 3-foot wide path, does it specify the height, or is it just the height of the cutter?
I would say the height of whoever needs to, within reason. Yeah, it's just for passing through. It's not to like make a big, not to alter the, thing. So the height for me versus some other people, Jason in the back, he's at least a foot taller than me, is going to be different, the needs there.
You ever seen a situation where they've possibly done a bad storm where they've a bunch of them uprooted themselves, then maybe flown off and then possibly created obstruction?
I'll say after hurricane, I was on the recovery team for Hurricane Ian, so I went down to Fort Myers. That was like a pretty bad storm in a heavily mangroved area. We were all in the mangrove area, and I did not see any uprooted mangrove trees. We did see them broken, where the tops had come, similar to how you see trees break in half during storms. The mangroves are really resilient and kind of designed themselves to be there. They do break a lot of wave energy, and they break a lot of wind action. I will also tell you, when I was down there, the homes that had the least amount of damage, even on the coast, were the ones that had mangroves in front of them. I'm not kidding. I am a proponent of your mangroves protect you better than your seawall ever will. So,
Well, if there was substantial erosion and it did somehow uproot and flow off into a place uprooted where it did cause obstruction, how would one go about that at that point?
so at that point, it's causing an obstruction, so then it must be in a roadway or it's going to be the same exemption of, public access utility exemption.
But that would be, again, super, I cannot see that happening.
never-
Mangrove roots are specifically engineered by nature to actually prevent erosion. They're the best form of erosion control. So if they've come uprooted, something really bad has happened here. That's like a Cat 6.
Yeah, I've been in a Cat 5 hurricane recovery area surrounded by mangroves and not seen a single one uprooted. I've seen them broken and their limbs broken, but never uprooted.
Double down on that, just as it pertains to property, property damage or the aspect of human health or whatever, human safety, we're not gonna be in the way of protecting private property and life.
Yeah.
Mangroves have to come out and please don't make no mistake about that.
Yeah, if we need to get in a storm event, we need to get mangroves out of the way to rescue somebody. Human life is more important here, so. All right, I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Appreciate it. If any of there was a handout that went around. It was like an FAQ. We hand those out to homeowners. If anyone wants a digital copy of that available, please let us know and we can send you one.